Welcome. If you've been following my channel, you know that I've been promising Hawk and Hatchet reviews basically forever. And this is me finally getting around to at least starting to fulfill that promise. And I figured an appropriate place to start, since I've been covering a lot of Ukrainian-made BPS and Beavercraft knives, would be with the BPS, well, they call it their Bushcraft axe, but I'm going to refer to it based on its size class as a mini camp hatchet. And I'm going to compare it to a couple of other mini camp hatchets I have that have this similar, shall we say, full tang slab-o steel construction, including my old handy JXE JXO, the Gerber, and no, I really do need to do a totally separate video on this because, yeah. Okay, let me start by just throwing out a bunch of statistics at you, including what I paid for the things when I got them. The JXE JXO I've had for the longest, and as of this filming, it's still going for around 15 US dollars. Don't know if it's going to stay that way because, well, reasons, but that definitely makes it the most affordable option. It's 420 stainless steel with a Rockwell hardness of probably around 52. The Gerber, made in USA, is the next most expensive. It goes for around 37 US dollars. It's also 420 stainless steel and also about 52 HRC. The most expensive one, 50 to 55 US dollars, is the BPS. Now this one is 1066 carbon steel that my test files are saying more like 57 HRC, so it's definitely harder. We'll see how it performs. What about, well, the other statistics? So let's talk about overall length. They're all very similar. The BPS, yes, I'm looking at my notes to give you the metric as well as the imperial. The BPS and the Gerber are both 9.5 inches long, so about 24 centimeters. The JXE is a quarter of an inch longer, 9.75 inches. About 24.75 centimeters, because it has that little extra kind of impact tool sticking out the end of it. The weights, not a whole lot of variation, but it is kind of surprising, and the explanation for that will come up in another statistic here in a minute. But okay, the lightest one is the Gerber, 16.5 ounces, 468 grams. Next up is the BPS, 17.5 ounces, 496 grams. The heaviest one is the JXE JXO. That clocks in at 19 ounces, 539 grams, and yeah, you do feel that extra mass. Now, as for the bit lengths, also very similar. The Gerber and the BPS have a bit length, blade length, of 3.5 inches, 8.9 centimeters. The JXE JXO is a little bit longer at 3.75 inches, 9.5 centimeters. But, okay, stock thickness. These are basically slabs of steel with different kind of handles secured to them. But the Gerber and the BPS are both 5 millimeters thick. The JXE is 6 millimeters thick, which is where that extra weight comes from. All right, let's break down the differences in the design. The BPS and the Gerber both have curved bits, where the JXE JXO is a straight edge. Now, the Gerber and the JXE JXO taper down, starting from, well, about there and about there. And then there's a secondary edge bevel. Now the JXE JXO I have refreshed because I've used it a lot, so it has a much keener secondary edge bevel, but I'm going to say it came with a much keener secondary edge bevel than what's on the Gerber, which is really steep, and yeah, we're going to see how it performs or not. On the opposite end of both, you have a squared off pawl, which could be used as an impact tool, but on the Gerber, one thing they did is they beveled all of the edges. And it wasn't just to break corners. They beveled it so much that it's kind of like the blunt swedge on the false edge of a knife. It sort of becomes sharp again. So it's not clear if this is designed for hammering or some kind of splitting or breaking, and we're going to come back to that when we talk about high grip. All right, the BPS, big slab of steel, no taper until you get to, well, a pretty short edge bevel. And they call this a Scandi grind, but it's actually convex apple-seated in profile. So this is definitely by far the thickest blade behind the edge, and we're going to see what that does to how it performs. On the back you've got, I don't know, I feel like they couldn't quite make a decision. They didn't put a spike, they put kind of a semi-truncated blunt. It's got a corner on it, and it's at a weird angle. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be for. Maybe an emergency glass breaking or other thing breaking tool. I haven't quite figured out utility-wise the best use for that, and I'm thinking about making some changes to it. I personally, for a utility hatchet, prefer a pawl I can hammer with, and that just ain't it. When it comes to the interface with my hand, I'm going to say I like the JXE JXO grip the best. Arguably, yes, it looks a lot like an extrema ratio design, but it's got the ergonomics, retention, shock absorbing. It's a nice rubber retained with a single screw, and yeah, there's a nice protrusion out the bottom with the lanyard hole to use as an impact tool. I just really, really like the way this feels and performs under even extended use impact. The Gerber, kind of in the middle of the field, okay, polymer grip retained with a single screw, rubber insert front and back, otherwise it's, I'm going to say, pretty plain. There's a flare down here at the butt to help retain the hand where your lanyard hole is. Yes, the tang does come out a little bit for an impact tool, but it's just not spectacular, and I don't like the shapes up here, which we'll get back to in a second. But I have a lot of problems, I have to admit, with the BPS. Walnut scales that are, for whatever reason, riveted on. And I'm used to BPS products having screws, not rivets. Which means, okay, I have thrown the other two. I'm afraid to throw this one because I know the first sloppy throw or just extended impact use is going to knock these scales loose, and I don't have an easy way to remedy that. I can't just tighten the screws down. But worse. Okay, well, this is the only one that has this forward bend to it, and I don't know the technical term for that. If you happen to know, please put it in the comments. But as you can see, there's no flare at the bottom to help retain my hand. It actually kind of tapers towards the butt. Some shallow grooves cut in down here. But let me demonstrate. Even getting a good solid grip on it, it's really easy to pull this out of my hand, which is exactly what happens when I'm chopping with it. I am constantly re-gripping the thing. There's not even a lanyard hole down here to help me out with, well, potentially avoiding losing it while I'm using it. So that's kind of scary. My most secure grip I found is if I put the top of my hand above this bend. But even then, yeah, that is not going to happen with any of the other ones. But let's go higher up. If I'm going to get my hand up behind the bit to use it for close work, all right, the one I like the least is the Gerber. I mentioned all those beveled corners, all right, makes it actually kind of sharp all over on the edges. And then they decided to kind of put these weird random shapes in here, a little bit jimping, tiny finger groove, bigger finger groove. The corners they put on the top of the grip, yeah, I just can't get a comfortable or secure grip on this thing, and because it doesn't have much of a beard, I can't really get my hand behind the edge as compared to, all right, the JXE JXO, it's a squared off slab of steel. There's a hook here which makes for some interesting indexing and retention, some big jimping on the back, but it is more comfortable, more secure, feels more natural in my hand by far than the Gerber. And because of the big beard, yeah, I can get my hand well behind the edge of the bit for fine work. But I'm going to have to say, when it comes to high grip, I like the feel ergonomics of the BPS the best. Continuing the scales up high, which yes, could get in the way of splitting. We'll get back to that in performance. But yeah, everything's rounded, nice finger groove. The beard allows me to get my hand up nice and high. I can lock my thumb on the top of the scale, get behind that bit edge for fine carving. But with this really steep, thick edge, is it going to be any good at fine carving? Let's talk about the carry systems that these came with, starting with the one that I like the least, the Gerber. It's nylon on the back. There's a couple of different loops for different orientations of carry. But what I really don't like about this design, and yes, I do have it on some other hawks and hatchets we're going to look at, is this top Velcro flap. So when I'm carrying it on my belt, I'll reach down and pull that open and hope it just doesn't fall shut, because I have to let go of it to reach down low and push up. And you can already see a couple of problems. One, because the grip and its corners are below the sheath. Yeah, that tends to hang up. But what really tends to hang up on all of these is the pointy toe of the blade gets stuck in the seam of the sheath, and I'm struggling with that every single time. Once I get it out, I'm pulling it out from the head. That means I need to shift my grip, and when I go to put it away, well, it's also quite a fumble, and then the heel of the blade tends to want to hang up, and yeah, just really don't like it. But speaking of nylon, okay, the JXE, JXO came with a nylon sheath. I did add an extra strap to it to give me a couple of different ways to carry it orientation-wise. But I've really come to like this one as I've carried it and used it. If I'm wearing it on my belt, it has a single Velcro strap. If I pop it, it just, well, unhooks the back and the hatchet falls into my hand. Need to make sure I don't drop it in the process. And putting away just as easy. I just hook the heel of the blade in there and secure the Velcro. It's not the neatest thing, and yes, I did have to add a couple of extra rivets right here to keep that pointy heel of the blade from going clean through the seam, but I really do kind of like this setup. It's nothing fancy, but speaking of fancy, okay, BPS gives you nice thick leather, and that comes in the form of a belt loop, which is awesome because I can put a whole lot of other tools in here, use it for other things, gives me some options, and that belt loop does allow me to just reach down, hook it, and deploy it fairly readily. Now, it still has its thick leather mask on protecting the blade, but if this is one of those unthinkable self-defense situations, I could simply rotate it around and use that spiky pole as an impact weapon until I could get the mask off. Now, when it came to me, the mask was really tight. It's still kind of getting broken in, so yes, it deploys very smoothly, but putting it back together is sometimes a little bit of a fight. But I'm going to say I really like what came with the BPS. Really hate this. All right, let me start the testing actually after I ran the test battery to show you what the post-testing edges look like. And I don't think any of these are going to do much to paper, but on cardboard, starting with the BPS, you can see it's pretty much just shredding its way through. The Gerber, okay, better, not great. JXE, JXO. Oh yeah. Okay, that's arguably nicer, but spoiler alert, things are going to get more depressing from here. All right, please bear with me. I am still working out my best testing protocols for hawks and hatchets, and I am also not nearly as good or comfortable with them as compared to big choppy knives, and that's definitely going to show in the tests. Speaking of which, I figured it would be also fair for me to do a comparison with, well, something I am more comfortable with in a section that I'm going to call, is it better than a Becker? Are these hatchets or hawks better than some of my favorite big choppy field knives? And in this case, I decided to compare these mini camp hatchets to my BK7 because I figured it'd be a fairly fair size comparison. But the first test, as I mentioned, I've been throwing the things, but not the BPS because I figure I'm going to knock the handle scales clean off first time. But when it comes to the JXE versus the Gerber, I could throw them both. I feel like, for me, the JXE throws a little bit better. Some of that's the balance, some of that's the grip, but some of it's also the sharpness of the corners as compared to the rounded bit on the Gerber, which sometimes if it hits just too flat, it'll bounce out. The next test kind of harks back to some of my knife and sword tests, the bamboo test. Now, in this set, I wasn't worried about inducing a chip or a roll on a fragile edge, but in some of the hawk hatchet reviews that are coming up, that did become an issue. But I'm also not hitting that media trying to chop through it. I'm hitting it with the speed and rhythm I would usually use when I'm fencing, which gives me a sense of how nimble the weapon is in that kind of use. And one of the things I struggle with a hawk or a hatchet is the fact that I have to be extra accurate in terms of distance measure because I've only got, 2.5, 3.5 inches of bit to make contact with. And you definitely see that happening in the test. If I short stroke it, I miss it, or maybe I just clip it with the tip, which might make a tip slash. Or if I'm a little bit too close, I wind up hooking the thing. And that was a mobile target bouncing around. Now, I can certainly make use of hooking. We'll talk about that more in martial, but I have to be expecting it. It can't be, well, a surprise when it happens. But then moving on to things that make a little bit more sense for a hatchet. I started with doing some chopping. And first I started with a fairly thick applewood branch. Gerber. JXE, JXO. And I did them all. And I'm going to say I was pretty disappointed with the BPS. It's a very broad edge. It doesn't bite into that media very well. Again, hawks and hatchets are not my favorite tool, but Gerber did a bit better, and the JXE did better than that. And I think that was the one that felt most comfortable in my hand doing it. But was it better than a Becker? Is it better than a Becker? I say no, not really. So then I moved down to a branch that was a little bit smaller.
Gerber. Oh, that's close. Yeah. JXE, JXO. Only took 15. This is better than a Becker. Okay.
And using a similar number of strikes, you can certainly see the result. Struggled with that BPS, but the other two did manage to get through the media. The JXE, JXO did better than the other two, and comparatively to the Becker. Again, I tend to use big choppy knives for that. Now going to a thinner branch for that, I'm using my Indian pear, which is pretty resilient stuff. I do a lot of branch rendering when I do tree trimming, and all the hatchets did just fine. I've actually been using them a lot for jobs of that size.
Better than a Becker.
Speaking of jobs of size, splitting. Well, they're not axes, and they don't really have a wedge maul splitting profile. So I knew that was going to be a problem. Also, because they don't have the mass behind them, I had to resort to batoning with them.
And then figure out where I can hit the thing. Oh, that is just so fat behind the grip. I can't get much of a... destroy my baton before I get very far. Have the Gerber take over. Still killing my baton. Oh, look, something's happening, but I don't have much to hit on. Get down in there. Now wants to turn. Winner. Is it better than a Becker? No, it's not.
Very problematic because it has that pointed pawl. It just wanted to tear up my baton. I couldn't get a good spot to strike it other than striking it on the handle scales, which worried me. And that really thick edge just didn't get into, well, it was about, I would say, a 3.5 inch fir branch. The Gerber did better, but it still struggled. The JXE, I think, did the best of the three because it's got a fairly keen edge. But were any of those better than what I could do with a choppy knife? Is it better than a Becker? For me, no, not at all. And there is that argument we've talked about in my previous reviews where you shouldn't be batoning with knives, but for stuff like this, I actually find a choppy knife a lot more handy, but that may just be me. So I did some smaller splitting.
Gotta do better with a shovel. Finally. I'm hitting a knot. Better than a Becker. No.
And okay, it was a bit better. Had to bring it down. But I also tried to, get high up, get my hand behind the bit and do some carving with it. And all right.
Oh my, yeah, I'm gonna say this is like a chisel. Oh my. Thankfully the grip's comfortable. Same job with the Gerber. This hurts just to hold. Yeah, I don't want to do that. JXE, JXO. Yeah, see, I can bite in better with this. There are some sharp corners going back into my hand. I might want some gloves on. But yeah, that is just a better carving tool. Any potential for any kind of feathering. Just ain't keen. Just ain't keen. Gerber. God, it just hurts to hold. JXE. Yeah, I can do it. It is better. Look at the knot right there. Yeah, a little bit better.
Yeah, the BPS just, I feel like I would do a better job carving with another piece of wood. I just couldn't get it to bite. It really needs to be improved. And we'll get back to that. The Gerber arguably had a better edge, but it was painful to grip and put pressure on that way. I had to stop almost immediately. Now the JXE has a keener edge. Under pressure, yeah, those sharp corners can be kind of uncomfortable. Made me think about getting a glove on, but certainly better than the Gerber. Was any of that in any way better than a good knife like the Becker? No, absolutely not. But how do these function potentially as Marshall tools? In starting our discussion of any Marshall usefulness of a mini hatchet, first, well, we kind of talked about deployment a little bit when we talked about the carry systems. That having it in a belt loop, if I'm wearing it that way, makes it more accessible to me. This one did have the mask on the bit, but I still had a spike I could potentially use in a pinch. The second best deployment was the setup with the JXE, and the worst one by far is the kind of sheath that comes with the Gerber, and yes, we're going to be talking about that for some of the other hawks and hatchets that come with pretty much the same thing. But that's assuming you're wearing it on your hip in the field, probably not going to be walking around town like that. But yeah, it's going to depend on how you're carrying it. Is it strapped to your pack, your gear somewhere, your harness, is it in your pack? And this is where we, as we transition into actually using these as Marshall tools, I'm going to call this the Jenny Wren philosophy. If you're familiar with the RMJ Jenny Wren Mini Tomahawk, the idea behind that and other really small hatchets and tomahawks like this is about carryability, concealability, being able to have it in a pack, whether that's a backpack or a book bag, or they even said, you could apply it by having it inside a notebook or something like that you're carrying, where it wouldn't be expected, where you could then reach in and get to it quickly. Hopefully it's not back here on your back, it's where you can get to it, and deploy it as a striking tool. And one of the things these have going for them is that they do hit potentially harder than a similar size knife, but they are kind of restricted to striking, which is a very instinctive thing to do when you are under adrenaline, as compared to, you know, how familiar you might be with a knife or other implement. Now, there are certainly other weapons on this build, especially this one where you've got a pointy back, which you can use for back striking. That's on the table, or you could rotate it around and use it like that. For me, the curvature in the grip actually makes that feel a little bit more appropriate, like this is better designed as a martial tool than a utility tool. You could push punch with the top of the head. You could strike with the flat. Now, is this big enough for me to think about displacing another weapon? No, probably not. Any kind of hooking action I could make out of it is going to send whatever I'm hooking straight into my knuckles. So that better be something soft and not something hard or sharp. But we talked about this in the post-test results. I have to be pretty accurate on, well, range for making contact. I don't have much room to fudge a cut or a strike. If I go too short, I'm going to miss or might rake with the corner of it, and in that function, something that's got a pointier toe is going to be better. Speaking of pointy, if I go too long, it's going to hook. Now, I might be able to do some damage with the heel if it's pointy. This one, not so much, but mostly what that's going to do is hook and trap. And I better be ready for it. I can make martial use out of hooking and trapping. And the concept of trapping in different martial arts gets a lot of criticism because I think it's just a bad term. In English, people think of trapping as being grabbing a hold of something and hanging onto it. But martially speaking, a trap, being very similar to a hook, is just something where you get very temporary, maybe half a second control over something to move it, create an opening for something else. So if you're ready to make use of that, create that opening to use the rest of your body or something you might have in your other hand, or be able to come in with a strike that follows up from that hooking control, yeah, I could indeed make some use out of that. I could also potentially strike with the butt. If I happen to have it up here in a high grip, there are some punching and slashing actions I might be able to do with something like this, which I can also do with, yeah, any of the others. But if I was to choose between the three as a martial tool, yeah, the Gerber is still my least favorite all around. But could it be improved? And we'll get back to that. Between these two, okay, I really like the grip on the JXE JXO. Been using it a lot. I love the pointy toe in the heel on the bit. That's nice. I have a blunt pawl I could strike with or back strike with. Can mask to flat strike. Can hook with it because I have a nice beard. So yeah, between these two, it'd be a little tough. I'd feel a little bit more confident with this. And part of that is also going to be how keen the edge on this is as compared to that. If I'm hitting through thick clothing or something, it's going to basically function like a blunt instrument. Flipping it around this way better, but the curvature of the grip just doesn't really... We're going to see that in a more extreme sense with some of the other hawks and hatchets we're going to take a look at. But let's go ahead and end the video here, because my plan is, I think this could be improved, and potentially also, maybe this could be improved with some modification. So I'm going to see what I can come up with in terms of fixing my problems with the grip, fixing my problems with the edge, and then you'll see possibly a follow-up video, so stay tuned. As promised, there will be more hawk and hatchet content coming, most of them bigger than this, with one exception. But until then, let's get our conversation going. Thank you, as always, for watching, liking the videos, subscribing, following my journey, putting up with my madness, and I hope to see you back for, okay, yeah, one of the things we need to talk about is whatever this thing is.